January 3, 2026. Operation Absolute Resolve. Caracas is burning. 48 hours later, Nicolás Maduro, president of a nation with the world's largest proven oil reserves, is now in U.S. custody and will soon face criminal charges over alleged narco-terrorism. But let's be clear about what's really happening here. This isn't about narco-terrorism. This is about 1.4 trillion barrels of crude oil sitting beneath Venezuelan soil, the largest petroleum reserve on the planet. And for the first time in 50 years, it's about to be back under American control. Here's the paradox. Venezuela sits on more oil than Saudi Arabia, more than Russia, more than anyone. It should be one of the wealthiest nations on earth. Instead, it became one of the poorest. 7 million people fled. The economy collapsed. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency. The very resource that was supposed to guarantee prosperity became the mechanism of the country's destruction. How did the greatest natural resource on earth become a nation's death sentence? December 14th, 1922. Los Barrosos dos. At 1:47 a.m., the pressure gauge exploded. The drill pipe rocketed 200 feet into the air, and oil began erupting at 100,000 barrels per day. It continued for 9 straight days. The town of Chavez, just 3,000 people, was buried under 3 feet of crude oil. Workers couldn't cap it. The pressure was too intense. Venezuela was bleeding wealth into the sky. The man in control was Juan Vicente Gómez, the tyrant of the Andes, a cattle rancher who knew nothing about petroleum. But he didn't need to. Royal Dutch Shell, Standard Oil, Gulf Oil, the world's biggest oil companies, they all came running. Gómez made an unusual choice. He let the experts work. He took his 50% and let American and British engineers run the fields. By 1928, Venezuela was the world's largest oil exporter, driven primarily by massive foreign investment and expertise from these international companies. By 1950, Venezuela was the 4th wealthiest nation on earth per capita. The Avenida Bolivar was wider than the Champs-Élysées. Middle-class families flew to Miami for weekend shopping. For 3 decades, Venezuela perfectly converted oil into prosperity. But one man wasn't celebrating. Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso, Minister of Mines, a quiet lawyer who had studied what oil did to other nations. In 1960, he flew to Baghdad with a proposal. What if oil-producing countries worked together to control prices? It led to the founding of OPEC, bringing together major oil-producing nations, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait, to counter the influence of multinational oil companies and stabilize oil prices. Even as he built the system that would make Venezuela richer than ever, he gave petroleum a name. El excremento del diablo, the devil's excrement. He understood something no one else did. Easy money doesn't build nations, it rots them. 1976. President Carlos Andrés Pérez nationalizes the petroleum industry. Every foreign company was bought out. The PDVSA is born. Petróleos de Venezuela, a fully state-owned oil company. They kept American and British engineers on as highly paid contractors. They sent thousands of young Venezuelans to Houston and Oklahoma for world-class training in petroleum engineering. They invested billions in infrastructure and technology. By 1990, PDVSA was producing 3 million barrels daily, operating with the technical precision of ExxonMobil. It had become one of the most professionally managed state oil companies in the world. The nationalization had succeeded beyond all expectations. 1998. Hugo Chavez wins the presidency, a former paratrooper who had attempted a coup just 6 years earlier. His message resonated with millions. The elite stole the oil wealth. PDVSA was a den of oligarchs in hard hats, technocrats who paid themselves in dollars while ordinary people struggled. So, he promised revolution. PDVSA's engineers saw this as a direct threat. The tension escalated. On December 2002, the PDVSA's leadership went on strike, not for salaries, but for autonomy. They wanted to preserve PDVSA as a meritocracy where expertise mattered more than politics. For 64 days, oil production dropped to nearly zero. $14 billion were lost. Gas stations ran dry, lines stretched for miles, the nation was paralyzed. February 2, 2003. Chavez appeared on national television to mark his 4th anniversary in power and the collapse of the oil strike. There was no talk of reconciliation. Instead, he confirmed a massive systemic purge. Ultimately, 18,000 employees, the industry's managers, engineers, and technical elite, were stripped of their positions. On live television, the message to the strikers was final. The company had been reclaimed, and they were never coming back. Venezuela lost virtually its entire institutional knowledge of oil extraction, and unlike other oil-rich nations, theirs wasn't just any oil. Venezuelan oil is fundamentally different. The Orinoco Belt contains 1.4 trillion barrels of crude oil, the largest deposit on Earth. Here's what most people misunderstand. Venezuelan oil is extraordinarily heavy, tar-like, and contains a lot of sulfur. This makes production and transportation very expensive. At room temperature, it doesn't flow. Extracting this requires steam injection, thermal recovery, chemical treatments, horizontal drilling, and constant pressure monitoring. It's one of the most technically complex oil extraction and refinement processes on the planet. You cannot easily build the technical expertise required for this process. You cannot replace decades of specialized knowledge with political loyalty. And the 18,000 people who possessed this knowledge? They were gone. The fired engineers didn't just leave PDVSA. They left Venezuela entirely. They scattered to Calgary, Houston, Abu Dhabi, and were absorbed almost immediately by international oil companies desperate for their expertise in heavy crude extraction. These were some of the best petroleum engineers in the world. In their place came political appointments. Party loyalists whose primary qualification was allegiance to the Chavez government, not years of technical training. At first, the consequences weren't visible. Oil prices were soaring globally, reaching $147 per barrel in 2008. Even with production becoming increasingly inefficient, Venezuela was still generating massive revenue. The high prices masked the decay happening underground. The infrastructure was quietly failing. Steam injection wells that required constant maintenance were being neglected. Pipes corroded without replacement. Pressure sensors went offline and stayed offline. Critical systems were breaking down. Then came August 2012. The Amway refinery, Venezuela's largest, exploded in a massive fireball. 42 people died. The official investigation concluded the cause was lack of maintenance. The production numbers tell the rest of the story. By 2015, output had fallen from 3 million to 2.4 million barrels per day. By 2020, it had collapsed to just 500,000 barrels daily. The machines had broken down completely, and there was barely no one left in the country who knew how to fix them. 2013. Hugo Chavez dies of cancer. His successor, Nicolás Maduro, a former bus driver and devoted loyalist, inherits a country already in collapse. The timing couldn't have been worse. In 2014, oil prices crashed as Saudi Arabia deliberately flooded the global market with cheap crude. By 2016, Venezuelan heavy crude had become too expensive to refine profitably. International buyers stopped purchasing it altogether. By 2019, Venezuela was in complete freefall. Hyperinflation reached 10 million%. 7 million people, nearly a quarter of the population, fled as refugees. South America's once wealthiest nation had become a humanitarian catastrophe. Through it all, Maduro blamed external forces, U.S. sanctions, foreign sabotage, American imperialism. By 2025, Venezuela was barely functioning as a nation. PDVSA was producing less oil than Ecuador. The government was surviving on gold sales and loans from Russia and China. Then, U.S. intelligence agencies confirmed two damning allegations. First, cocaine trafficking networks operating through Venezuela had become a primary pipeline for drugs entering the United States. The Drug Enforcement Administration traced cartel routes directly through Venezuelan military-controlled zones, with evidence suggesting high-level government complicity. Second, Venezuela was allowing Iranian military shipments through its ports, missiles, drones, and weapons systems. The United States issued a final ultimatum: cease all narco-trafficking operations and Iranian cooperation or face military intervention. Maduro refused. January 3, 2026, Operation Absolute Resolve. Delta Force and Navy SEALs struck the Presidential Palace, Defense Ministry, and Intelligence Headquarters simultaneously. 36 hours later, Nicolás Maduro was in handcuffs aboard the USS Iwo Jima, facing federal charges of narco-terrorism. The century-long oil story had reached its climax. Even before Maduro's capture, negotiations had been underway. The U.S. government had been in quiet talks with ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, BP, and Total Energies about returning to Venezuela if regime change occurred. Now, just days after Operation Absolute Resolve, those plans are being accelerated. Early reports suggest investments totaling over $40 billion are being discussed, with ExxonMobil considering $15 billion for the Orinoco Belt alone. The proposed structure mirrors the past, production sharing agreements giving 60% to Venezuela, 40% to the companies. The historical circle is almost complete. In 1922, foreign companies discovered Venezuela's oil. In 1976, Venezuela nationalized and expelled them. In 2026, they're being invited back to rebuild what collapsed without them. 104 years ago, a geyser erupted in Cabamas and changed Venezuela forever. The wealth that followed should have built a prosperous nation. Instead, it created a dependency so profound that the country simply couldn't survive without it. Today, as Nicolás Maduro sits in custody and foreign oil companies prepare to return to the Orinoco Belt, Venezuela faces the same choice it's faced for a century. Can it use this second chance to build something beyond oil? Or will history simply repeat? Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso saw this coming 50 years ago. He knew that oil wasn't a blessing, it was a test of whether a nation could handle enormous wealth without losing itself. Venezuela failed that test once. The question now is whether it gets another chance to pass. Support our channel by hitting that subscribe button and that bell icon so you won't miss our upcoming videos. It means a lot to us.